Chapter 12, Odysseus's Revenge. The old beggar stood and stared at the stone steps leading up to the house of Odysseus. Down in the dust, an old dog pricked up his ear and raised his head. The old dog was Argus. He had been a puppy when Odysseus had seen him 20 years ago. Now the dog was old and blind, and his coat was full of fleas, but Argus recognized the scent of his master. He wagged his tail and dropped his ears, but he was not strong enough to stand. Odysseus knelt beside his good old dog. He took Argus in his arms, fleas and all. That old dog licked the salt from his master's cheek. His loyal heart filled with happiness, and he died. Odysseus remembered he must pretend to be a beggar, so he gently laid his old dog in the shadows to be buried later and hobbled up to the steps of the great hall. The great hall was full of drunken suitors, eating like wolves, singing like crows, and dancing like ducks. They shouted for more wine and hit the servants who brought it. They threw food at each other, fell over benches, vomited, and laughed like hyenas. When the beggar asked for scraps from the table, they sneered at him, and one of them threw a wooden stool which hit Odysseus hard on the shoulder. When Penelope heard that a beggar from over the seas was in the hall, she sent for him. Any stranger might have news of her husband. Odysseus was brought to her, but she did not recognize him. It had been 20 years since he last saw her, but Penelope's beauty was still as clear and warm and shining. Her voice was still a music that went straight to his heart. Although Penelope did not recognize Odysseus, she liked him and felt she could trust him. "I can't put off those suitors any longer," she said. "Now they've seen through my weaving trick, and they've told me I must choose a husband. I have suggested a trial of skill and strength. Whoever can string the bow of Odysseus and shoot an arrow through the rings of 12 axe heads, as my husband used to do, that man shall carry me off as his bride." Odysseus smiled and said, "Good lady, hold your contest as soon as possible. Cunning old Odysseus will be here long before those weaklings can string a bow." That night the contest was staged. Suitor after suitor attempted to string the bow and aim it through the axe heads, but not one was successful. Then Odysseus shuffled forward. "Give me the bow, good sirs," he cried. "Let me see if there is any strength left in these old arms of mine." The suitors laughed and shouted, but at that moment Telemachus gave the bow to Odysseus. Then, as easily as a musician strings a lyre, he bent the great bow and strung it. In the silence that followed, he picked an arrow, drew it back, and let it fly perfectly down the line of 12 axes. Odysseus turned to his son Telemachus and said, "The contest is over, the feasting is done. Now is the time for dancing." Odysseus nodded. That was the signal. Athena raised her right hand, and the beggar was revealed to everyone in the hall as the mighty Odysseus. "The contest is over and won," he shouted. "Now let's try another target." He aimed arrow after speeding arrow at each of the suitors and shouted, "I am Odysseus. Yesterday you ate my food and drank my wine and insulted my wife. But today you die."